I never thought I'd have to face something like this in my marriage. After 16 years together, we had a stable family, solid careers, and a relationship I thought was strong. But everything changed one Sunday when my husband sat me down and started talking about something bizarre. Gaycation. A vacation for straight men where they can become gay without actually being gay. And then, he wanted to go with his brother-in-law. Why? Why now? What does this mean for us? It was a typical Sunday morning when everything changed. The kids were off at their friend's house for a play date, and I had just finished my usual weekend errands. I was looking forward to a quiet afternoon with my husband. We've been married for 16 years now, and life had been pretty good. Stable jobs, a nice home, and 2 wonderful boys. Sure, we argued sometimes, but it was nothing that felt beyond the ordinary. Our relationship felt solid, and we had a good, healthy intimacy. I never thought anything could shake that foundation. But then, as I walked into the living room, I saw my husband sitting on the couch with a piece of paper in his hands. He had this strange, almost nervous look on his face. The moment I sat down next to him, he started talking in a tone I hadn't heard before. "Do we have the house to ourselves?" he asked, his eyes flicking around the room like he was about to confess something. I nodded, still unsure of where this conversation was going. "I need to talk to you about something," he continued, pulling out what looked like a poster. It was brightly colored, filled with bold text that read, "Gaycation, the ultimate escape for straight men." I froze. My mind raced, but I couldn't quite comprehend what I was looking at. He went on to explain this concept, his voice casual, almost like he was discussing a vacation package for a tropical getaway. "It's where straight men go to places like Ibiza, sun, sand, booze, and, well, they get to experience gay stuff for the duration of the trip. But here's the thing," he added, sensing my confusion. "It doesn't count. It's like, what happens on the gaycation stays on the gaycation." I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "Wait, what?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He went on, elaborating that straight men go on these trips to explore same-sex experiences without any commitment, because it's all temporary, just a getaway from their regular lives. "It's not cheating," he said matter-of-factly. "It's a way to become gay for the trip, but it doesn't change anything about who they are when they come back." He said it like it was the most normal thing in the world, but nothing about this was normal. I sat there, my mind spinning. I couldn't find words. My husband, the man I thought I knew, was telling me about some bizarre vacation where straight men become gay for a week, and somehow this wasn't supposed to affect anything. And then, in the next breath, he said, "I've been looking into going to Ibiza next year, with my brother-in-law." It was like a punch to the gut. His brother-in-law? His sister's husband? I didn't even know how to respond. I just stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. Are you serious? Are you telling me you want to go on this trip with him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though the shock was starting to make my heart race. He seemed oblivious to my growing discomfort, continuing to describe the freedom these trips provided. The release men felt, the exploration of their desires without any consequences. I was speechless. Was he saying he wanted to have sex with other men? Was this some sort of midlife crisis? I needed answers. "Are you gay?" I finally asked, feeling a strange calmness come over me as I tried to process it all. I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. Not yet. I just needed to understand. He immediately denied it. "No, of course not," he said, his tone defensive. "I'm 100% straight. I love you. I love our boys. This doesn't mean anything." The more he spoke, the more confused I became. If this didn't mean anything, why was he so adamant about it? Why was he planning it with his brother-in-law? Was he hiding something from me? I pressed him further, trying to understand, but the answers only seemed to raise more questions. Was he bi? Was this some form of hidden desire he had never shared with me? I didn't know. All I knew was that something felt very, very off. At that moment, I felt the weight of the situation. This wasn't a conversation I had ever imagined having with my husband. It wasn't just about a vacation. It was about something deeper, something I wasn't sure I could comprehend. And as he sat there insisting this was just a harmless trip, I realized I wasn't sure I even knew the man sitting across from me anymore. After hearing my husband explain the concept of a gaycation and his excitement about planning the trip, I just sat there, stunned and confused. I couldn't grasp what he was saying, and I felt like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The only thought running through my mind was, is he gay? He immediately denied it, insisting he was 100% straight and that he loved me, loved our family. But his words didn't seem convincing. If he wasn't gay, why would he want to go on a trip where the sole purpose was to experience gay things without any commitment or consequences? Was this a side of him I never knew? I couldn't stay silent any longer. I asked him outright, "Do you think you're bi?" My voice was steady, not out of anger, but out of a desperate need for clarity. I didn't want to ask this question, but his explanation was so vague that I felt I had no choice. He went quiet for a moment, his face defensive. "Don't accuse me of things," he said, his tone sharp. "I'm not bi, and I'm definitely not gay. This is just a vacation, an exploration, like visiting a zoo or a museum, to understand the world better." His comparison to a zoo or museum felt absurd, and I was left even more confused. How could something like this be just exploration without any impact on our marriage? How could he trivialize it like that? I pressed him further, trying to get through to him. "What if I went and slept with other men for a week?" I asked, trying to make him see it from my perspective. "Would that be okay?" His response was immediate and defensive. "That's completely different. A gaycation doesn't count because it's temporary. It's like it never happened." I stared at him in disbelief. "But if that's true, then what is the difference between that and cheating?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't have an answer. He was growing more agitated, repeating over and over that what happens on the gaycation stays on the gaycation, and it didn't count as cheating. I couldn't make sense of it. His insistence that this was all harmless, just an opportunity for discovery, made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Was he asking me to accept that he could explore his sexuality outside of our marriage, and that none of it would matter when he came back? I felt the weight of the situation settling in. "If you really want to go, then our marriage is over," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I can't stay in a relationship where you're planning to do this." He didn't say anything. He just sat there, looking conflicted, but also strangely quiet. I didn't know whether he was actually processing what I was saying or just trying to justify his decision in his mind. The longer the silence stretched, the more it felt like everything was slipping away. I knew I had to stand my ground. He had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, that this wasn't a huge betrayal. I needed to know who I was married to, and I needed to decide if I could continue with him, if this was the reality of our future. The following days felt like I was walking through a fog. I couldn't escape the conversation with my husband. Every time I tried to go about my daily routine, his words kept echoing in my mind. What happens on the gaycation stays on the gaycation. His strange explanation that this was somehow just a vacation and not cheating weighed heavily on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing something more than just trust. I was losing him, the man I had been married to for 16 years. He didn't bring it up again after our confrontation, but the tension between us was palpable. The silence in our home was suffocating. When I looked at him, I couldn't help but wonder if he was the same man I married. His face was blank, distant, and every time our eyes met, it felt like there was a wall between us that wasn't there before. I tried to give him space, but it was clear he was struggling. He wasn't himself, but neither was I. It felt like we were both adrift, each of us, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. Monday morning came, and I was shocked when he didn't leave for work. Normally, he was an early riser, ready to start the week with his usual routine. But this time, he stayed in bed. He texted his boss, claiming he felt too ill to go in. I didn't say anything, but I couldn't help but wonder if it was because of the conversation we'd had. Was he avoiding me? Was he avoiding facing what was happening? That afternoon, he finally spoke to me. His voice was quieter than usual, and there was an almost fragile quality to it. "I'm really sorry," he said, his eyes searching mine. "I didn't mean to hurt you." The words felt hollow, though. They didn't sound like the apology of a man who fully understood the impact of his actions. He wasn't admitting guilt, just regret. Regret that I was upset, not necessarily regret for the things he had said or planned to do. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Why? I asked, my voice tight with frustration. Why do you want this so badly if it doesn't mean anything to you? If you're not gay or bi, then why would you need to experience this? Why go to Ibiza with your brother-in-law? Why not just talk to me about it? Why make it into some secret? My heart pounded as I waited for his response, but there was no immediate answer. He just looked at me, his eyes clouded, like he was struggling to find the right words. Finally, he spoke, but it wasn't what I wanted to hear. I just need to know what it's like, he said, almost pleading. I've been thinking about it for a long time. It's not about being gay. It's about exploring something new, something I don't understand. But it doesn't mean I love you any less. I still want to be with you. I just need this. His words were like a slap in the face. How could he say that? How could he say he needed something like this? Something that felt like a betrayal of everything we had built. I felt sick to my stomach, but I tried to keep my composure. You need to figure this out, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You can't just do this and expect everything to be fine. If you really want to go, then you need to understand that our marriage can't survive this. He went silent again, his face clouded with confusion and something else I couldn't quite place. Fear? Regret? He didn't respond, just stared at me like he was trying to figure out his own feelings, trying to justify everything in his head. The emotional toll of it all was wearing me down. I wasn't sure how much longer I'd keep pretending that everything was fine, that we were going to be okay, and I was terrified. Terrified that if he went on this trip, it would mean the end of us. The tension between us only deepened in the days following our conversation. My husband went back to work, but his absence didn't feel any less distant. The silence that hung over us was suffocating. Each morning, I tried to pretend everything was normal, but every time I looked at him, the reality of what we were facing came crashing back. I couldn't stop replaying his words, his insistence that he needed this gaycation to explore something that had been building inside him for who knew how long. It felt like everything had changed overnight, and I didn't know how to navigate this new, unfamiliar territory. I tried talking to my friends about it, but they just didn't understand. They said I should be supportive, try to be understanding of his need to explore, but they weren't living in my shoes. They didn't feel the betrayal in the pit of their stomach every time they saw their husband act like nothing was wrong. How could he be so casual about it, so certain that it wouldn't affect us? It felt like a violation of trust, an intrusion into something sacred. The more I tried to make sense of it, the more lost I became. It was on a Friday night, a week after our last conversation, that things came to a head. I had spent the entire week in a constant state of anxiety, my mind racing with questions I couldn't find answers to. What was I supposed to do? Could I really stay in a marriage where my husband was planning to explore his sexuality with someone else, even if he swore it didn't mean anything? I couldn't wrap my head around it. The fact that he still didn't seem to understand the gravity of what he was proposing only made it worse. He came home late that evening, looking more exhausted than usual. He barely said a word as he walked through the door, but I could tell something was off. He'd been distant all week, but this was different. I could feel the weight of the situation hanging between us, the unspoken tension that neither of us could escape. He didn't make eye contact when he sat down next to me, and for a moment it felt like we were strangers. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "Maybe we should talk again about the trip." My heart sank. I had been hoping he'd come to his senses, that he'd realize how much this was tearing us apart. But his words only confirmed my worst fears. He was still thinking about it. The trip, the exploration, the whole damn thing. I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You're still thinking about going?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound steady. He looked at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't quite place. Desperation, perhaps? "I don't know how to explain it," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I just need to know if it's something that's in me, if it's something I'll regret not doing." I couldn't breathe. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, leaving me with nothing but this painful truth. "And if you go, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What happens to us? What happens to our family? His eyes softened, but there was still a glimmer of uncertainty in them. I don't want to hurt you, he said, his voice cracking. But I don't know if I can live with myself if I don't do this. The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. I sat there, speechless, staring at the man I had loved for so long. I felt like I was losing him, and no matter how much I wanted to fight for us, I wasn't sure if he was even there anymore. The man sitting in front of me was a stranger, someone who didn't seem to understand the devastation his actions were causing. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and steady despite the overwhelming emotions threatening to break through. If you go, there's no coming back from this. We can't go on pretending like everything's okay. He didn't answer right away, but I could see the struggle in his eyes. He was torn, caught between his desire to explore something he couldn't fully explain and his fear of losing everything he had with me. I knew in that moment that the next few days would decide everything. If he went through with this, our marriage would never be the same. And if he didn't, I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew it couldn't go on like this. The silence stretched between us, each of us waiting for the other to speak, but neither of us knew what to say anymore. The days after that conversation felt like an endless waiting game. My husband and I were barely speaking. He was home, but the man I had once known felt like a stranger. The emotional distance between us was almost palpable. He would spend hours in the living room, his eyes glued to his phone, as I tried to carry on with normal life. I couldn't help but wonder if he was still researching this trip, if he was still planning on going, despite everything I had said. That evening, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen, waiting for him to come home. My stomach was in knots. He had been out again, this time for longer than usual. I had 1,000 questions running through my mind, most of them about how we had gotten to this point, but there was one I kept coming back to. Why was he so insistent on going? It wasn't just about exploring something new. There was something deeper at play, something I couldn't fully understand. He had told me that it wasn't about his attraction to men, that he wasn't gay or bi. But the more he spoke about this gaycation, the more it sounded like an escape, a way to live out a fantasy without the real consequences. When he finally walked through the door, his face was pale, almost as if he had been carrying a weight too heavy for him to bear. It wasn't the usual tiredness from a day at work. This was something different. Something was off. I didn't say anything at first, just watched him take his coat off and hang it up by the door. But the silence was too much. I couldn't wait any longer. Are you still planning on going? I asked, my voice steady but with an edge of desperation. Is this trip really something you think will fix everything? He turned to face me, looking defeated. I don't know anymore, he said quietly, his eyes searching mine as though looking for reassurance that he hadn't already lost me. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I know I've hurt you, but this thing, it's not easy for me to let go of. I felt a pang of anger mixed with confusion. You're saying this is something you need to do? I could hear the disbelief in my own voice. How could he think this was something we could just sweep under the rug? What about us? What about everything we've built? He sighed deeply, rubbing his hands over his face. I don't know how to explain it. I've felt this way for a while. And I thought, maybe I could do this and it wouldn't affect you, it wouldn't affect our family. But now I see how wrong I was. I see how much it's hurting you. I shook my head. It's not just hurting me, it's breaking everything we've worked for. You can't just go away and do this and expect nothing to change. It will change everything. My voice cracked at the end, and I turned away, fighting back tears. I didn't want to cry in front of him. I didn't want to show him how deeply this was cutting me, but I couldn't stop it. He took a step toward me, reaching out as though he wanted to comfort me. I never meant for this to happen, he said, his voice filled with regret. I thought it was something that could stay separate, that it wouldn't affect us. But I see now that I've made a mistake. I've made you feel like you're not enough, and that's not fair. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was just a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. But something inside me was telling me this was bigger than that. This wasn't just about a trip to Ibiza. This was about something deeper. something he had been hiding from me for a long time. I don't know how we can fix this, I said softly, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I don't know if I can trust you again. The silence between us grew heavier as he stood there, unsure of what to say. He had broken my trust, and no matter how much he apologized, I wasn't sure it would be enough to rebuild it. We were standing at a crossroads, and the path ahead seemed unclear, darkened by the uncertainty of what he had planned and what it meant for us. For the first time, I realized that no matter what happened next, things would never be the same. The question now wasn't whether I could forgive him. It was whether I could ever look at him the same way again.